Hi class, Professor Tayson here, and I'm leading you in a very short video that will discuss with you how to go about reading. We may think that reading is something that we all know about, that we all understand, that we're ready for, what have you, but I'd like to say that there is a process of reading that we can engage in such that we are fully participating with not only our minds and maybe our souls, hopefully, but also our imaginations, which might be another name for soul. Without imagination, there is literally nothing in our lives. Nothing. No career, no futures, nothing. So, an English 102 class is very useful and it provides a great function in our society because it focuses us on our imaginations and how we can learn to engage those imaginations. So let's get started. The first step is called SQ3R. Survey, question, read, recall, review. This is a whole process in and of itself for reading. So the first stage in that process is to survey the text, to give it a once-over, to look at it and see what's there without fully starting to read yet. So I'm looking at the cover of our book. I'm looking at the card insert that is very important to us in this class because it gives me a way to engage with some of the quizzes and other material in the class, and I need to use the code that comes with that card in order to engage with those services. I see the frontispiece. The first page is called the frontispiece. And on the other side of it, small lettering, that is information that I'll need for my works cited page for any given text. And then I see the table of contents. This one has two. It has a brief table of contents, and then it has a more in-depth table of contents that begins where? On page Roman numeral 5. So we can discern from the table of contents that the book is divided into short stories first, poems second, and drama third. And then we have a last section, and it's called Writing About Literature. This will be very useful, especially because it has a sample research essay that starts on page 1134. So there's my survey of this text. And then I want to also consider that the second step is to ask questions. Why is it a portable 14th edition? What does portable mean, for instance? Or what does introduction to literature mean in the first place? For us, the answer to that question might be that we're looking at a historical context of these works, such that the works do not exist floating in space, but they're connected to the historical events that surround them and the authors that lived and wrote those works. When I ask questions, I'm engaging my imagination on a level that is personal to me. Maybe someone else won't ask that same question. How wonderful. We're giving an individual understanding to these texts. Part of what we're doing by engaging with the text is to bring out our own individual understandings about the text. And then partly what we're doing when we're writing about the text is, yes, we're learning close reading skills, but we're also learning how to engage ourselves in this text in a personal way, a way that supports our own individual understandings of the readings. Survey, question, then I read. And then as I'm reading, I'm trying to remember so that I can go on to the next step, which is recall. I put this book down after I've read the play, and I try to recall what happened exactly in that scene. What questions did I have about that scene? And then I realize, oh, I need to go back because I left out this one part right here. And when I do that, I'm reviewing it. So there is the structure of our reading experience. Secondly, on the agenda today is to discuss with you 5 aspects of what literature is. This is from a book called A Short Introduction to Literary Theory by Jonathan Culler, and he gives us 5 parts to what literature can be seen as. The first is literature is a foregrounding of language. Foregrounding, the opposite of background. Foregrounding is to put it up front. Language is put up front in literature in a big way. It's very strange sometimes. No one walks into a room and says, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness," right? We walk into a room and we say, "Hey, how you doing?" "Hey, how you doing" is not literature. "Thou still unravished bride of quietness" is literature in 1819 in England, let's say, when John Keats was writing that line, but it's not literature today. It can be considered historical literature. But the point is that language is forced to the front, and I'm asked to look at it, to give it a certain attention. The authors gave it a certain attention when they were writing it, and they're expecting that I give it a certain attention when I'm reading it. What does the poem mean? How does the language of the play work in this soliloquy? What does this sentence do? So, language in a literary piece is looked at in and of itself. Secondly, literature as the integration of language. So language is also integrated. So first I have languages foregrounded in literature, then I have languages integrated, and then my third step, or my third thing that's different, is language from regular daily use of language. Language is a fiction. And fourth, language is an aesthetic object. And fifth, language is intertextual or self-reflexive. So the first I've discussed very briefly, language is integrated. Language is foregrounded. Then I have languages integrated, meaning that the language that is written in this poem has things in common with itself. There are repetitions, for instance. It's integrated by the repetition of the rhyming at the end of this line, or it's integrated in the use of the word gaze in a play, such as Othello, or it's integrated in ways like the idea of greenery as something of rebirth is continually contained in the piece itself. So I have this way of seeing the language as a developing motif, as something that's coming into being. I'm making it come into being as much as, you could say, the author is, by my imagination. Thirdly, language is a fiction. The literary work is a linguistic event, Jonathan Culler writes, which projects a fictional world that includes the speaker, actors, events, and an implied audience, an audience that takes shape through the work's decisions about what must be explained and what the audience is presumed to know. So it's a linguistic event. It's a fictional world that's being created before my eyes. It's being constructed as if it were a construction site, a theater scene, a theater ambiance, a way that the actors will walk into a scene that's a constructed scene, and they will give life to this language. In this scene, which we all know is fictional when we're in the theater, yet it starts to become very real. Or in a movie, films, fantastic. There's some fantastic movies that are made from constructed scenes, scenery. It's a made-up thing on a lot in Hollywood, but it feels very real to me when I'm watching it. So literature is a fiction. It's not seen as a representation of the author's life. So it's not seen as something that's an extension of who the author is, but it can be given context by the historical age in which the author lived. Fourth, literature as an aesthetic object. It's a crafted object. It's a thing that's sculptured. Sculpted. It's like a sculpture. It's like a painting, right? A painting is created by the craft of the painter. A poem is created by the craft of the poet, just as drama is created by the craft of the dramatist, by the playwright. Putting this scene here, followed by this scene there, or this line that is said will be represented 3 scenes later in maybe different words, but it will be a reflection of what has come before it. So this is integrated text. A poem is integrated by the rhymes, by the rhythms, by the repetition of sound. It's very important to see that the aesthetic object is not using the language of information. I'll meet you at the store on Main Street at 3 o'clock is not literature. It's not the way we hear literature at all. It's simply informational. Literature lacks information. We give it historical context to provide some of the background maybe, but still we're paying attention to the foreground, to what's happening in the language. Last, literature as intertextual or self-reflexive. So works are made out of other works. To read something as literature is to consider it as a linguistic event that has meaning in relation to other discourses, Jonathan Culler tells us in the short introduction to literary theory. So the literature has meaning in relation to other pieces of literature or in relation to other songs. Let's say there's a song in the play, and that song is something known by the audience of that time. And that song is interfacing with the moment in the play in a really interesting and complex way. The hearers, the audience, are hearing it as something of their own culture, of their popular culture. And that is giving further meaning to what's happening in the play at that moment. Or a poem can be written in relation to a previous poem, say 100 years ago. They're in dialogue with each other. Or a song. Mary J. Blige is influenced by Stevie Wonder. U2 is influenced by Mary J. Blige, right? So these are intertextual. So my imagination also, I'm calling on it to ask it to connect my work that I'm reading here with other works that I might be thinking about or that I might consider as related to this one. Okay, so this is a jumping off point for us for reading our first works in the class. Thank you for listening. I look forward to all of your ideas and opinions.